Work hard, play hard, the accepted custom of modern life. But it comes at a cost. We don't get enough sleep. Not sleeping will kill you quicker than not eating. And shocking new research reveals that sleep deprivation causes diabetes, heart attack, obesity, and even depression. This two-part series investigates the hidden dangers caused by lack of sleep. This episode exposes the latest science from around the world that proves tiredness damages our health and can be lethal. This Canadian has volunteered to sleep only 3 hours a night for a week as part of a unique scientific experiment. But after just 6 days of restricted sleep, his suffering has become unbearable.
I feel like my bones are cold. My head is just absolutely killing me. The noise builds and it's almost consuming. Everything is slow. What the heck could possibly make the world shake like this?
I work as a paramedic. I go to school full-time, so I live a very busy life.
You have a bit of a bump on your head, but other than that, you're doing pretty good, okay?
I'm also a martial artist. I'm a 4th degree black belt in Goju Karate. My martial art training takes about 17 hours a week.
Should I got my hand in there?
If I can cut back my sleep, I definitely will. And so this experiment, I want to see, what the health effects are going to be.
25-year-old Shanann Donovan is on a quest to reduce his sleep from 8 to 3 hours a night. So he's agreed to be scientifically tested by a sleep doctor at Toronto's Tri-Hospital Sleep Laboratory.
For the first time, we are monitoring sleep deprivation as it occurs in the real world. Shanann is a very good candidate for this subject. He's young, he's healthy, he's very disciplined and very focused.
Now just lay down, make yourself comfortable.
The experiment begins with Shanann being wired up for an overnight study, so his sleep biology can be compared before and after sleep deprivation. For the next week, Shanann will be under constant surveillance by scientists and television cameras to record for the first time the harm caused by loss of sleep.
I was very excited about this experiment. I thought this is an ideal opportunity to monitor and observe what the effects of sleep deprivation are on your physical and mental performance.
Sleep is always at the bottom of my important list, and this is really to see how far I can push that envelope and see what I can get away with.
Experts tell us we need 8 hours sleep a night, but why? Our body requires 3 hours of shallow sleep, 3 hours of deep sleep, and 2 hours of dream sleep. Deep sleep revitalizes the body, and dreaming recharges the mind. But with the pressures of modern living, we get around 90 minutes less sleep a night than our ancestors did only 100 years ago. 1 in every 3 of us is sleep deprived and carries a sleep debt. A sleep debt is like nature's loan shark. It has to be returned, or we pay the price. One American scientist who knows exactly how lack of sleep affects our lives is world expert Professor David Dinges.
You said you slept well last night?
Well, we have the largest studies ever conducted on experimental sleep deprivation in healthy adults. We have run near to 10,000 24-hour days in the lab of sleep deprivation, looking at all these basic questions of how much sleep you need and what happens to you, and that exceeds all the sleep deprivation studies that have ever been done combined.
Nice frontal lobe desynchronization. So he's
For 20 years, Professor Dinges has been running the world's largest sleep restriction experiment in Philadelphia. At any one time, 5 volunteers live in an enclosed laboratory for 16 days, where they experience up to 4 hours sleep loss a night. They then undergo a series of tests to see how their performance is affected. The results are used to help understand the risks associated with shortened sleep schedules and reported to American health institutes and agencies such as NASA.
The tests are deliberately selected to tap into a number of different aspects of mental function. So we're looking at attention, speed of reactions, the ability to discriminate things, the ability to remember things.
We will be doing the psychomotor vigilance test.
Well, the most dramatic effect one sees early on is cognitive slowing. You simply cannot think as fast and as accurately as you normally do. The other thing that's dramatic is the problems with attention. You have difficulty being attentive, and you miss key pieces of information. These are called lapses, and what seems to subserve them or underlie them is a phenomenon called microsleeps. It's sleep itself intruding. And approximately beyond 16 hours of wakefulness, you begin to experience impairments that look very much like someone with a 0.08 level of alcohol, which is the legal limit in many countries.
The most significant finding from this study is that sleep deprivation radically impairs performance. People make up to 10 times more mistakes when tired. Surveys show that shift workers make up 19% of the global workforce, but most get less than 6.5 hours sleep daily. So tiredness accounts for 1/3 of all workplace accidents. Now, disturbing new research reveals that worker fatigue can be lethal, especially in the healthcare industry.
Interns and residents in the US are working 100 hours per week. 1 out of 5 interns reports having made a fatigue-related mistake that has injured a patient, and 1 out of 20 interns reports having made a fatigue-related mistake that has resulted in the death of a patient.
Get him out, okay.
In Australia, 15% of doctors work more than 80 hours a week. Some work 24-hour shifts.
All right.
In Adelaide, a groundbreaking experiment by Australian researchers is discovering how tiredness affects behaviour in emergency situations.
The aim of the experiment is to examine the way in which night work impacts on the performance of anaesthetic registrars, particularly looking at the ways in which restricted sleep might change their decision-making behaviour, their ability to diagnose problems and work as a team in the operating theatre.
Just a bit slow this morning. Still a bit tired from last night.
The sleep-deprived anaesthetist doesn't realise that the operation is deliberately designed to go wrong.
The sabotage today is with the filter leak. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
Part of the scenario involves a subtle leak in the anaesthetic circuit. The focus is on the anaesthetist. All the other people in the theatre are wired up, and we instruct them to follow the script.
Jane, can you nod or shake your head? Has Tien spotted the leak yet?
Jane?
Yeah?
I think there's a bit of a problem. Right, so there's a problem with that. I think there's a bit of a leak. There's a definite leak now. Turn my gas flows up. I think it might be the filter.
The fatigue group took significantly longer to detect, diagnose and respond to the problems that we provided them. In fact, they took 52% longer. Their performance was in the impaired range. They buy time where possible, double-checking, triple-checking, all what we'd call performance protection strategies. Those types of delays aren't what we want to see when the problem is time critical. All right, Jen, that's the end of the scenario.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the dangers of worker fatigue are starting to be taken seriously. Doctors' work hours are coming under increasing scrutiny, and sleeping pods are being installed in hospitals so workers can nap in a busy environment. A high-tech solution to detecting fatigue has been developed in Australia. The OptAlert glasses measure the speed a person blinks by firing an infrared beam at the top eyelid 500 times a second. When we are drowsy, our blink upstroke is 3 times slower than normal. The OptAlert computer detects this and issues a warning.
Danger, you are showing signs of drowsiness.
And so we actually think this is an important role for machines and technology in the future. Reading the human face, reading behavior in precise ways, and then giving information back to the individual on just how incapacitated they are. And we think ultimately this will find its way in the doctor's offices and elsewhere.
Worker fatigue is dangerous, but there's an even bigger killer that affects us all. Australian research reveals that drowsy driving causes 1 out of every 4 vehicle accidents. In America, 80,000 people fall asleep at the wheel every day, and 8,000 die each year. On the 28th of February 2001, fatigue made the headlines in England when a drowsy driver was at the centre of an unprecedented tragedy.
Hello?
Hello, you're through to the police.
Hello, yeah, I've had an accident on the M62. I've gone off the embankment, down off the road, and I'm on a railway line.
Oh, right. And the vehicle's blocking, still on the railway line?
But a train's coming. Oh, no, oh, no!
Hello? Are you still there?
On that fateful morning, the vehicle left the motorway, went down an embankment and got stuck on a railway line. Minutes later, a high-speed passenger train hit the vehicle. The train derailed but kept going until it collided with a freight train travelling in the opposite direction. The final toll was 10 dead and 76 people injured. The driver of the car was 37-year-old Gary Hart. He claimed his car suffered mechanical failure, but experts suspected he fell asleep at the wheel. One of the men appointed to determine what caused the accident was Inspector Mark Iverson.
The scale of this particular accident was huge. It was classed as the highest-speed road traffic accident in the world at the time. In order to put the case together, we obtained over 2,000 witness interview statements, and that's what the thrust of our investigation was, to establish whether it was linked to sleep deprivation or whether it was in fact a mechanical failure.
For the next 9 months, England's top sleep scientists and over 1,000 police officers processed forensic evidence. This was the first time a drowsy driver was on trial for causing multiple deaths. So several sleep experiments were conducted to quantify the link between tiredness and driver error. Crucial questions came under scrutiny, such as, was Gary Hart sleep deprived and could he have avoided the accident? A key piece of evidence came from the tyre marks.
Where he'd come off the carriageway and onto that grass verge, it was a very gentle drift. The 4 degrees angle is wholly consistent with a person having fallen asleep at the steering wheel.
When he tells the officers that he's been to bed for 2 to 2.5 hours, is in fact a lie.
Evidence and record showed us that he'd had either his landline, his mobile phone line, or the internet connection open throughout the evening prior to the accident, and right through into the early hours of the morning. We were able to show categorically that he'd been awake and without sleep for 22 hours. I was in absolutely no doubt, based on all the evidence that we had, that Hart had fallen asleep at the wheel.
Gary Hart was found guilty on 10 charges of causing death by dangerous driving. It was the first time in the world a drowsy driver was made accountable for multiple deaths.
This whole catalogue of events was set in motion by a man who drove while seriously sleep deprived. He has fallen asleep at the wheel, and the result is the tragic accident where 10 people lost their lives.
In Toronto, Shanann's ability to drive while tired is about to be put to the test.
Okay, Shanann, you're all wired up.
Excellent.
Are you ready to go?
Oh, I'm ready.
Go out and have fun.
See you in a bit.
This is an exercise to determine how Shanann is going to cope with his sleep deprivation. It's a test of his physical and mental performance. During this exercise, he will have lapses of attention where we will be able to record micro-sleep. And you just need a few seconds of loss of attention to cause a serious accident.
In the first test, the instructor uses his arms to direct which way Shanann should turn. He is deliberately leaving this as late as possible, so Shanann needs to pay attention.
I wasn't nervous at all. I thought I could drive, and this was going to be a piece of cake. On the first few runs, it actually went pretty good, so I got a little confident and relaxed, and that relaxed, I think, kind of got to me as well.
It's kind of fun.
What Shanann doesn't realize is the real test is to see how he deals with surprises.
That was a little freaky. Didn't expect to see that dog coming out. See if we can get faster this time. Killed Rex. Yeah, when you're sleep deprived, your reaction time is just gone.
Shanann is failing every test, and in the next one, the instructor is going to do something quite unexpected.
Got the mirror there, so I feel quite horrible right now. If I wasn't sleep deprived, I probably wouldn't have hit those at all. Just would have noticed that he wasn't going to move and stopped ahead of time or slowed down and picked my own route instead of just kind of dozing off and almost forgetting that I was even supposed to turn. And
How did you find the driving test?
Oh, that was a lot of fun.
And you think you did well?
No.
What was your overall?
I don't think I did well.
Yeah.
Unless you count, crashing into a bunch of pylons.
What if it was a brick wall?
I hopefully would have used common sense. I'm hoping.
You didn't use common sense?
No.
What if I told you you had 18 microsleeps?
18.
Ranging from 3 seconds to 13 seconds. And the average was 7.8 seconds.
While I was driving.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
A microsleep is where the brain grabs a quick nap without your permission. They strike without warning, which is why they are so dangerous. Shanann's poor driving proves that sleep deprivation has radically affected his performance. But as his tiredness increases and the sleep debt grows, the next casualty will be his state of mind. In Philadelphia, the researchers are making startling new discoveries on how the mind suffers due to lack of sleep.
So go ahead and indicate where you think the blue dot will be next time. What we're looking for here is what specifically is most affected, and are there certain areas of the brain that seem to be particularly vulnerable to the effects of sleep loss.
One exercise that reveals how the brain fails during tiredness is the finish the sentence test.
He mailed a letter without a
stamp.
Too many men are out of
Work.
At first you get to give answers that are straightforward, but then we test you on giving us the ends of sentences that are the opposite or unrelated to the context, that is, have nothing to do with it. So you have to inhibit the normal overlearned response and say something that doesn't fit at all. That takes genuine brain power, and that gets eroded when people go through sleep deprivation. The dog chased the boy out of the
book.
While you're doing a goal-directed task, suddenly your brain shifts into idle. It looks a lot like you're unstable. You're fine, you're fine, you're fine. Then suddenly you start varying greatly. And it's that unpredictability that is the hallmark of sleep loss.
Professor Dingy's accidentally discovered the full extent of that unpredictability while testing a healthy volunteer.
We give you a number like 932, and you must mentally subtract 9 from it, say the answer out loud, then 8 from that, the answer out loud, 7 from that answer, etc. So both numbers are changing.
932, 704, 612, 402.
So he's counting backwards, and he's trying desperately to remember what the number is and what he has to subtract, and then suddenly he goes quiet. So then I say, continue.
What if chemical bath, squared root, running pants, took road, up stairwell, up squared, unquote, centrifugal Pythagoras.
And he just keeps going on like this until I tell him to stop. And this looks very much like we've induced a kind of parasomnia, that, like you might see in a sleepwalker.
The man experienced what scientists call reverie. Our brain retains millions of pieces of information. Usually they're well organized, so the correct answer to a question can be easily accessed. But during reverie, random thoughts from one part of the brain intrude into another. The result is a temporary mental disorientation. This was one of the best documented cases of reverie in an individual undergoing sleep deprivation. Professor Dingy's had shown that even in healthy people, basic mental functioning could collapse when tired.
People differ dramatically in their response to sleep loss. Some have unbelievably high levels of impairment early on, as soon as we take even a little bit of sleep away. And so for some people, it may be really quite dangerous to get even mildly sleep deprived.
One of the dangers is depression. At America's University of Michigan, researchers have confirmed that there's a connection between lack of sleep and our mood.
Our own research has suggested that the sleep disturbances are there long before the symptoms of depression emerge. Not everybody who has a sleep disturbance will develop depression, but the risk is elevated 5 times.
But the most startling discovery from this research is that teenage depression can result from poor sleep in childhood.
We know that children who have persistent sleep problems in early childhood are much more likely to develop depression in their adolescent years. Even as early as age 3 to 6 years of age, the risk for depression is already elevated in those kids with persistent sleep problems. And typically, the more disturbed the sleep, the greater the risk for developing depression later on.
When children are sleep deprived, they have trouble sustaining deep sleep. Their brain waves look more chaotic than in healthy sleepers and signify an early diagnosis for depression.
There is no group in our society that has lost more sleep per night than children. So children have lost an average of about 10 minutes per night every year for the last 20 years. Children don't become sleepy as adults do when they get sleep deprived, but become much more hyper-aroused. And that's why many sleep-deprived kids are misdiagnosed as having ADHD. And then they're given stimulants, but that's not because the source of the problem has been addressed. They haven't been getting the sleep that they need.
Researchers have shown that a lack of deep sleep negatively affects our health. But how vital is dreaming? For over 100 years, scientists have tried and failed to create an experiment that reveals why we dream. But recently, the world's top dream scientists solved the problem with an ingenious demonstration.
So your goal is very simple: stay alive. So in the Alpine Racer study, altogether I think we've run 60 subjects now. And they spend 45 minutes playing the game, and then they take a rest for maybe 15 minutes. Ouch. And then play another 45 minutes. And then they'd come back that afternoon, they'd do a third 45-minute session. Ouch. And in the evening, we wire them up so that we can record their sleep. Good night.
Good night.
And then we see what kind of an awakening we do. And it would be either after 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes into their sleep, and asking what sort of images they were getting. How long has he been asleep now?
Well, he's just starting, so he's only been asleep for about 30 seconds.
Why don't we get out to 45 and then we'll do the awakening.
Okay. And do it now.
Okay. Matt, please wake up now. Okay, if you'd report whatever was going through your mind before I woke you up.
Oh, that's kind of weird. I can remember actually being in the game, like an actual racer going down the mountain. And I remember crashing a lot.
So the reports we get at the beginning of the night, 90% of them are actually giving us reports of images of skiing. It's as if the brain has already identified what's important, and that's all that it's playing for you as you fall asleep.
But when Professor Stickgold woke his subjects up after 2 hours of undisturbed sleep, the dream reports were surprisingly different.
Okay, I'd like you to report what was going through your mind in the period before I woke you up.
This time, it seemed like I was in a castle, maybe like somewhere in Europe.
When we collect dreams from people later in the night and ask them to tell us what that refers to in their waking events, it never replays what happens in the day. It looks like sleep takes memories that you formed in the recent past and strengthens them and integrates them with other memories, so that the next day, the memory is not the same memory that you went to bed with. It might even be more inaccurate than it was the night before, but it's still more useful. That's what dreams are really about, figuring things out that they hadn't figured out while they were awake. And that's a process of searching through networks of memories by mechanisms that aren't as available to us when we're awake.
The significance of this experiment is that it's the first scientific proof that we dream to consolidate memories. Cut back on dream sleep and brain function suffers.
If you don't sleep and don't get to dream, your brain will push that into waking. You will start hallucinating, probably without exception. It's the whole conscious process breaking down, and you're becoming, at least temporarily, truly psychotic.
Back in Toronto, dream-deprived Shanann is losing his grip on reality.
It's 3 in the morning. Every night, I stop to make any sense, like that sentence.
They've got their eyes open and they're hallucinating almost in parallel with being awake. Very similar to what we see in schizophrenics.
I do have auditory hallucinations. The noise builds and it's almost consuming.
My depth perception, my reality was started getting a little bit warped. Reaching for a glass, and I looked over at it, and it looked kind of weird, slightly out of reach.
I noticed that he was twitching his eyes and would stare and then twitch again. And what I realized then was this was a dream sleep mechanism activating.
This rapid eye movement is the signature of dream sleep, so Shanann is starting to dream while awake. Through hallucinations, his world looks totally different. To quantify how Shanann's brain is affected by 5 days of sleep deprivation, a psychologist performs some tests.
I'm going to say a string of numbers. I'd like you to repeat them to me in reverse order. 5, 7.
7, 5.
4, 1, 5.
4, 1, 5.
514. 539418.
814-937.
What I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to touch a series of blocks, and I want you to repeat that pattern in the same order that I do. Okay, this time I'm going to say some sentences. And rather than anticipating the word that you would expect the sentence to end with, I want you to think of a word that would be atypical or not correct. The boy flew his.
Kite.
The girl drank some.
Water.
Monkeys like eating.
Bananas.
What I'm going to tell you again is that I want you to fill in the last word of the sentence with a word that doesn't seem to belong. Okay?
Yeah.
You ready?
Shanann is failing the test because he is unable to think laterally. The reason why can be found in his brain. Normally, many regions of the thinking brain, the cerebral cortex, communicate with each other to allow us mental flexibility. But during chronic sleep deprivation, many parts of the thinking brain involuntarily go to sleep. With brain regions unable to talk to each other, intelligent thought is impossible. Shanann's thinking brain is shutting down. The longer he stays awake, the more regions of his brain will go offline and the more his health will deteriorate. Scientists now know that sleep deprivation affects the mind and can make us unstable, depressed, and even psychotic. But what does sleep loss do to the body? The research team in Philadelphia has recently discovered that tiredness reduces the body's resistance to disease.
We're doing studies right now looking at the immune system responses, and there's no question there are physiologic consequences to sleep loss that are at a fundamental biological level. The body behaves as though it's under viral attack or there's some risk of that. You can liken it to a kind of immune defense response.
But the most disturbing find is that sleep deprivation can affect appetite and cause obesity, especially in children.
Too little sleep in children has been associated with increased weight gain. Sleep duration of a child at 3 could predict their obesity at age 7. Whenever the sleep seems to get shorter than 7 hours a night, the risk for obesity goes up. People who decrease their sleep time tend to get heavier faster.
New revelations out of Toronto link obesity to a dangerous sleep disorder and an increased risk of heart attack.
The major factor that leads to obstructive sleep apnea is obesity. And the reason for that is because if you put weight on, men tend to put it on in the belly and in the neck. And when the neck thickens, not only does it grow outwards, it also grows inwards, impinging on the throat.
Professor Bradley is a leading authority on sleep apnea and its effects on the body. But what is sleep apnea?
The throat muscles actively keep the airway open when you're awake and when you go to sleep, and those muscles relax. Now, instead of it being a rigid, bony, encircled tube, it's now like a rubber tube or a wet straw. So when you suck in on a wet straw, it closes.
The sleep apnea sufferer is unable to sleep and breathe at the same time. When they try to sleep, their throat muscles close shut, so they must wake up to avoid dying of asphyxia. Some wake over 800 times a night.
Well, I had difficulty when I went to fall asleep. Inside my throat felt like one side was touching the other. During a 2-year period, I just got more and more and more fatigued. My quality of life was terrible. I could not walk from one end of the driveway to the other because I was so short of breath.
54-year-old Ann Meader has chronic sleep apnea, and she sought help from Professor Bradley.
As we expected, you do have sleep apnea. And when we look at a sleep study to determine whether somebody has sleep apnea and how severe it is, the first thing we look at is how frequent are the apneas. Anything over 5 is abnormal. So Anne was just on the borderline at 15 per hour. The apnea itself was causing acute increases in blood pressure and heart rate.
The medical staff were so concerned with Anne's condition, they decided to test her heart.
When they did the chest x-ray, they discovered an extremely enlarged heart. Next morning I went for an echocardiogram and everybody was just shocked.
An echocardiogram is basically sound waves that are bounced through the chest wall off the heart. According to the time of arrival of the sounds and their frequency, you can determine the size of the heart, you can determine the proportion of blood pumped out of the heart with each beat. At that time, her fraction was 8%. Normal is greater than 55. So 8% is almost not compatible with life. So the bad news is that your heart is not pumping very well. Ordinarily, when the heart is pumping this poorly, the only solution is a heart transplant. So I'm sorry to have to give you that news.
Yeah, it's hard. It was really a stunning moment because your heart is like your central machine, and if it isn't pumping and doing what it should, then you're dead.
So Anne, this is the CPAP device.
Professor Bradley treats Anne with a continuous positive airway pressure, or CPAP mask. Invented in Australia in 1981, CPAP therapy is the most effective remedy for sleep apnea.
CPAP splits the whole airway open, all the way from the voice box to the tip of your nose. So when you breathe in, your throat gets bigger. When you breathe out, your throat gets smaller. Because you're not waking up so frequently, you can now get into a deep sleep.
I slept really well. I didn't wake up all night long.
You got started on the CPAP. Tell me about how it's been going. 6 months later, after using CPAP 6 hours a night at home, she was a new woman. It was absolutely amazing to see. Well, Anne, I have some very, very good news for you. First of all, when we started you on CPAP in the lab, we completely abolished your sleep apnea. It's gone. But the really exciting news is your heart function has improved dramatically. Over the last 6 months, from this heart hardly moving at all, and now it's beating normally. The amount of blood ejected from the heart is now 55%, which is normal.
Oh my gosh.
But the really good news for you is that you don't have to have a heart transplant anymore.
Oh my God, that is such a relief. I mean, when I was told that this was somewhat of a miracle, everything was back to normal size, it was exulting. It was just wonderful to know that we had managed to make it better. The sleep apnea played a part in the heart failure. When the sleep apnea was looked after, my heart came back to a normal size.
Not all apnea stories end as positively as Anne's. 1 in every 7 middle-aged adults has sleep apnea. Most don't even realise. Yet left untreated, it can be fatal.
We have performed studies in patients with congestive heart failure over the last 10 years or so. We found that in patients who had sleep apnea who did not accept CPAP therapy, that their death rates were twice as high as people who didn't have sleep apnea. The major finding of our study was if you had sleep apnea, you had 3 to 4 times the risk of developing a stroke than if you didn't have it.
New research from the University of Chicago has found that lack of sleep not only affects the heart, but the blood too.
The risk of diabetes increases with age, and we lose a lot of our ability to generate deep sleep. We thought to give healthy young volunteers the sleep of an older person, and then to measure their glucose metabolism to see if it moved towards a pre-diabetic state.
But to give a young individual the sleep of an older person, the research team had to design a rather clever experiment.
My senior colleague, Dr. Tessali, developed this system by which she eliminates deep sleep by sending sounds to amplifiers on each side of the bed. She is there all night, watching the screen, and when the subject enters deep sleep, she sends in a signal that is loud enough to bring them back to shallow sleep, but not loud enough to wake them up.
The next morning, the volunteer is given glucose, and his blood is taken at regular intervals to see whether his insulin production has become impaired through the lack of deep sleep.
Oh, wow, I can feel it.
When we deprive healthy young individuals of deep sleep, we find that they are at an increased risk of diabetes because their sensitivity to insulin is lower and their beta cells in the pancreas are unable to release enough insulin to compensate for that. The body is interpreting sleep deprivation as a stress, and stress-responsive systems will actually inhibit the pancreas from producing insulin. Chronic sleep deprivation may increase the risk of diabetes by about 50%.
Once Professor Van Korter discovered a link between sleep disturbance and type 2 diabetes, she wanted to investigate why sleep loss causes weight gain. So she employed magnetic imaging to study the part of the brain that regulates appetite.
So the volunteers receive glucose by mouth, and we measure how their brain imaging changes. The hypothalamus is where the central control of appetite occurs. And so we are interested to see if the hypothalamus becomes sort of deaf to the glucose when an individual is sleep deprived as compared to fully rested. Too little sleep has an adverse effect on the way our body processes glucose and also seems to dysregulate appetite, resulting in excessive hunger and a risk of weight gain.
Tiredness drives us to eat more because it upsets.
When you are chronically deprived of sleep, you also begin to release the hormone ghrelin, which is a stimulant to our appetite, makes us feel hungry. And the hormone leptin, which is normally a signal that we've had enough to eat, is decreased in its abundance in our bloodstream. And so suddenly we're getting a stimulus that says, I'm hungry and I'm not satisfied with what I've had. And so we become ravenous, and that may be underlying the epidemic of obesity in our society.
Back in Toronto, Shanann's health has deteriorated and his eating habits have changed.
Yeah, I've been eating really poor foods during the night. Pizza, chicken wings, ice cream.
This is typical of sleep deprivation, where your body feels hungry, and even though you eat a lot and you're full, it would not turn off that hunger sensation. Suffering the consequences. His fatigue, his droopy shoulders, his droopy eyelids, those were all indications that he was sleep deprived.
A blood sample from Shanann is taken so his health can be compared to what it was before the experiment began. The results are shocking. His physiology has radically deteriorated in just 1 week. His insulin production is nearly half what it was a week ago and is now in the pre-diabetic range. Leptin, the hormone involved in turning off hunger, has decreased by half. His defense-reactive proteins have doubled, indicating that his immune system is now only half as effective.
It's the stress associated with the sleep debt that causes an elevation in those chemicals. It confirms what we knew about sleep deprivation, that it's harmful to the body.
But would sleep deprivation affect Shanann's ability to perform his...
I have my 4th degree black belt. To make the mistakes that I was making is just downright embarrassing. It was absolutely awful. It was disgusting, sloppy. Every time I was doing a spinning kick, the room would keep going afterwards. My mind seemed to know what to do. My body wouldn't do it.
One of the times he's supposed to punch here, punch me in the chin. A couple of times he kneed me, didn't ask for a knee, so he was adapting and making his own things up instead of what he's supposed to do. His mind was going all over the place. I don't think you should probably come back to classes when you're sleep deprived.
Thank you, Yoshi.
My head is just absolutely killing me. I just feel like I'm coming down with the cold. My sense of temperature is just way off the map. I feel like my bones are cold.
I shook hands with him. They were very, very cold, and that would indicate to me that he's under an extremely stressful situation where his blood vessels are constricted and there was very poor circulation.
In studies performed on animals, a drop in body temperature is the first sign that acute sickness or death may follow. Dr. Hussain terminates the experiment. He wants Shanann to get a full night of recovery sleep and the research team to monitor every aspect of his health.
I'll see you in the morning.
Too bright for you?
The sleep actually felt like a long sleep. I had a lot of dreams. This morning, I feel like I have a bit of a sleep debt. I feel between 80 and 90% refreshed. I'm not 100% myself. My energy's a little bit on the low side.
It's time for Dr. Hussain to give Shanann the results of the whole experiment.
Sleep deprivation has harmed you. You have performed much poorer than you had expected to. If we had to continue this for another week and did a blood sugar sample, we would see that your blood sugar levels would be in the diabetic range.
Interesting.
It's going to take you a long time to recover that sleep debt.
But the most surprising result from the whole week was from the driving test.
Well, of the 2 hours of testing that you had a total amount of 25 minutes of sleep.
How was I driving?
You tell me. What was even more alarming, and I've never seen this before, is that he went into full sleep while operating that vehicle.
25 minutes of sleep was recorded during the road test. Most naps occurred when Shanann sat idle between tasks. But sleep was also verified whilst the vehicle was in motion. So this experiment proves that you can have your eyes open, drive a car, and yet be fast asleep. And this explains what happened next.
If we recorded sleep on his brain activity, how was he operating this vehicle? And of course, what comes to mind is what's called automatic behavior. This is very like sleepwalking, where individuals wake up from their sleep and they move about.
Scientists now know that during tiredness, parts of our brain go to sleep, even if our body remains awake. The implications of this are frightening. Sometimes we may actually be asleep without our knowledge. Fortunately, the damage caused by sleep deprivation is reversible. All we have to do is sleep. The blood tests performed after Shanann's recovery sleep confirmed that all his physiology returned to normal.
Now that this is all done, I can look back and we have actual scientific proof. We have, data showing that I am not at my best being sleep deprived. It'd be stupid of me to ignore this information, so I definitely will find I'm getting a lot more sleep.
This sleep deprivation experiment has shown that it affects your body physically and mentally, and it points to self-destruction. So if you want to live a normal, healthy life, you need good sleep.
Scientists have proved that even a small amount of sleep deprivation can lead to a number of diseases. All agree that sleep must be treated with respect and not as something disposable.
I think our society is so sleep deprived that we don't remember what it's like to be wide awake. We all walk around in these fogs, and we drink our caffeine to help us maintain that alertness. But it's a shabby attempt at producing real full awakeness.
I would be willing to say right now, based on everything I know, there's no chemical substitute for sleep.
Sleep is really the third pillar of health. Like nutrition and exercise, sleep is every bit as important in order to be healthy and effective in what we do during the day.
Like it or not, nature designed our bodies to get 8 hours sleep every night. We mess with nature at our peril. In the next episode, we investigate the causes and cures for insomnia, a disorder that will affect 50% of us at some time in our life.